So I am going to be sharing some thrift store makeovers for your craft room storage. Welcome to CreArtive by Nature DIY and Decor. My name is Donna. So for this first project, I found this drawer and it had a little bit of damage. I only paid $3 for it, and I believe it was a storage drawer for VHS tapes. So I knew this would be a great piece of storage for our craft room, so I decided to refinish it. So I'm going to start off by removing the handle, and then I'm going to be removing all those slats that are on the inside. Now, there was a lot of glue residue left behind, so I ended up having to use a bit of Goo Gone, and I picked it off best I could, and it did all come off. Now, there was some damage left behind, but all that damage is actually just vinyl. So I just continued to clean this piece up. It was quite dusty on the inside, surprisingly, but I really like this piece. I knew it would be wonderful for some storage in the craft room. I'm giving this piece a really good sanding, and then I'm using a damp cloth to wipe away the dust. So I'm trying to use up some stuff in my craft room, and I had these large bottles of paint, but there was not much left in each bottle. So I just scored it into a container. These are just craft paints, and this is in like a warm cream color. And I knew this would not have very good adhesion, so I decided to add some gesso into it. Gesso is a primer that artists use on their substrate, and I knew that this would work well to mix in with my craft paint to give it better adhesion. So it's about 2 parts craft paint to 1 part gesso. This gesso is white. I just picked it up from Michael's. It's a nice smooth consistency. It's Artist Loft brand. And then I just continued to mix it until I figured I had enough to paint my project. So I'm just using a foam roller brush to apply the paint, and as you can see, I just got an ice cream lid as my palette. Now, as I started to roll this on, I discovered that there was clumps of paint in this. My paint was old, I admit it. But I really just want to try to use up some of my supplies that are in my stash this year. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to go for it. I have a trick to get rid of those little rough spots here in a bit. So I added 2 to 3 coats of the paint, and I allowed it to dry well in between. And I give a coat on each side, as well as I went in a little bit into the cubby where the drawer would go. So here I am working on the drawer. Again, this front little piece here, the panel, it is the only part that's wood. The rest is just covered in a vinyl. So I'm just painting this front panel of my drawer. Again, I give it 3 coats of paint and allow it to dry well. So here you can see those little lumps of paint, and I just used a sanding block to remove those, and they came right off. So I was so happy. All right, so now it's time to cover up the ugly mess that is that brown wood grain vinyl. I picked up this beautiful black and white floral vinyl from Dollar Tree. This is actually shelf liner. Now, I haven't worked with shelf liner a whole lot, so I wasn't exactly sure how to go about applying this. So I just did the best I could. So I decided to start off by covering the sides and then going down onto the inside, covering the bottom, and again on the other side. Now, I should have done it differently. I realized that after, but I just went with it. And I just measured out the amount I needed and then cut it down to size. So I had the size I need, but it kept on rolling up on me, so I back rolled it on itself so it stopped rolling. And now I am going to start to apply my vinyl onto this drawer. So I did find it a little tricky, but I knew that with this pattern, you wouldn't really be able to see the flaws that I may have created along the way. So I am just slowly peeling back the backing of the vinyl, and then I'm pressing it into place along the way. I ended up finding that using a straight edge helped me to apply this a little bit easier rather than just using my fingers. You could also use your tool from your Cricut maker or Cricut machine. Just use whatever you have on hand. So I'm just going to continue to apply this vinyl until I come to the other side. So I did have a little bit of excess at the end, so I'm just using a sharp utility knife and I'm just going to cut right along the edge for a nice clean finish. All right, so now you can see here, I'm covering the back of the drawer. Now, you're not gonna see this part of the drawer, but I wanted there to be a cohesive look all the way through. So I went ahead and covered that part up because you just never know if it ends up getting pulled right out. Anyway, so I just again cut a piece down to size and I applied that. And you'll see here in a bit where I kind of messed up and I should have applied my vinyl differently, but it is what it is. And I'm actually quite pleased with how it turned out. Besides the fact that there were a few flaws along the way. So if you have any tips on how to apply this, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. So I have to say, I think it's looking pretty good, but these corners were missed. So I'm just going in and adding a little bit, trimming as needed so it fits and covers up that corner. So I do that for both outside corners, and then I also had a little bit showing there on the inside corner, so I just used some gesso to cover that up. I put the drawer into place and now I'm working on the handle. So I had been working on another project and I had made a green paint mixture, so I just used that paint to paint out my handle, and then I put that into place by just reusing this. Actually, no, I had to get some new screws because I discovered one of the original screws was broken off. So I just went into my stash of screws and I reapplied the handle. All right, so my drawer is all ready to go. I am gonna have another video on how I'm going to be organizing my ribbons and trims, so stay tuned for that. I'm just loving this drawer though. I'm so happy with how it turned out. So for my next project, I found this cute little basket, and a viewer informed me that it is actually a Sewing Notions basket. It was filthy on the outside. I didn't want to change it up too much, but I knew it needed a good cleaning, so I took it over to my sink and I used a scrub brush to clean off the top. And then I dried it off really well. I wasn't sure how the water would react to this, so I wanted to dry it quickly. So I ended up moving it over to a vent that was blowing up from my floor, and it did dry very, very fast and there was no damage left behind. So I wanted to create partitions on the inside of this basket. So I got a piece of cardboard, and right here I'm just measuring out how big of a piece I need. So I ended up creating a piece. I can't remember the exact dimensions here. I think it was about 6 inches long. what I wanted to do was create about a 4-inch partition on the middle part of this basket. So I just cut it down appropriately. And then what I needed to do was also create 2 flaps, again, to create the partition. So that's what I'm marking out here. And to do that, you need to just mark it out and then fold that part up. And then you can start to see how I'm creating just like a little compartment space. So I'm trying to keep some continuity between all my pieces. So I wanted to use this beautiful floral vinyl again. So I am covering this piece of cardboard with this vinyl. Again, I'm just cutting it down to size and then applying it to the cardboard piece. So today's video is part of my Craft Room series. I will have a playlist for you in the iCards above, at the end of this video, as well as in the description box below, so you can keep up to date with all the projects I'm working on. I am reworking my whole entire space and I am loving it so far. I can't wait to show you the end result. So I do need to cover the entire piece of cardboard. So I cut another piece out to cover the backside, as you can see right here, and I trim off all the excess. The vinyl's all been trimmed away, and now I just folded the flaps up and I pressed it down into the basket. Now I wanted this piece to be a little bit more stable than it was, so I'm just using a little bit of hot glue just to help it to adhere to the sides, but I didn't want to add too much. I didn't want there to be a big clump of glue. So it's all ready to go. And I wanted to store my threads in here. So I did put some pins in here, but I end up removing those, and I just fill this whole basket up with thread, and I am absolutely loving this. It works so well for my needs. I'm not a big sewer, but I always like to have some thread on hand for any mending that needs to be done. Okay, so for this next project, I'm using this little art box I picked up for $2. It had quite a slick surface, so I gave it a really good sanding. I need the paint to adhere to this box, and I knew that it wouldn't adhere to that slick surface. So again, I'm using up some of my old craft paints. I'm mixing this beautiful green color along with some warm white and my gesso. So again, I had a clumping issue, but with the sanding block, I did work that out in the end. I just mixed about, again, 2 parts craft paint to 1 part gesso, and the white from the gesso and the warm white craft paint created a really pretty light green. It was like a cottage green. I thought it was so, so beautiful. And I made enough that I ended up having quite a bit to use for 2 projects. So again, I'm just using my roller brush to apply the paint, and then to get in all the little nooks and crannies, I used a paintbrush. I gave this box 3 coats of paint, and I allowed it to dry really well in between each coat. So I did end up leaving a portion on the top of the lid, and you'll plain, and you'll see why. And I also gave a coat on the bottom. So I wanted to add the detail of this beautiful black and white floral vinyl onto the lid of this box. Again, just trying to create that continuity. So I'm just measuring out how much I need. I wanted a little bit of a border of the green paint to go around just to create kind of a framed look. So my piece ended up being 7 inches long by about 4 inches wide. So this one was really easy to attach, and you can just see how well it fits on there and how beautiful it looks. I'm loving this little box. So I do end up spray painting this with some sealer. I had discovered in one of my other projects that the paint kind of lifted a little bit from one of the slick surfaces. So I thought, just to be on the safe side, I'd give it a coat of sealer. And as you can see here, I am using this little box to store my pins and needle. It looks so beautiful sitting on top of this basket. I am just absolutely loving these storage ideas for my craft room. Okay, so I found this wooden box at the thrift store for $3. It had a crack in it, but it didn't bother me. I knew I could still work with it. Now, this piece needed a really good sanding, and I did not sand it enough. So, a lesson learned, make sure you sand a really slick surfaces really well. So, to make it easier to paint, I removed that chain that was in the inside as well as the hinges. And then I gave this wood box 3 coats of my green paint mixture. I made a lot of this green paint mixture. I didn't realize how many ends of paint I had left in some of those little craft paint containers. So I'm glad I was able to use those up. So for this wood box, all I did was paint the feet, and I painted a little bit of a border around that wood box, which I'll show you here in a minute. I did paint the entire lid on the top side and on the outer edges with the green paint, but you'll see here again in a minute that I left the inside of this lid plain. Okay, so you can see how the lid is left plain on the inside there. I decided to cover that inner part with our black and white floral vinyl. Again, I just cut it down to size, and I applied it to that inside lid. It looks so pretty with that green. I think it's just gorgeous. And it hid that broken part there. Now you still can see that split on the upper portion of my lid, but you'll see that it's actually not going to matter once I show you the end product. So I just decided to also cut down a piece of cardboard to fit on the inside of the wood box, and I cover that with our beautiful vinyl as well. So this piece of cardboard is from a cereal box, and I didn't want the image from the cereal box to show through, so I just covered the brown portion of this cardboard, and I didn't worry about the bottom because it's not going to be showing. And I end up having to trim this piece down just a little bit more because it didn't end up fitting. I guess my measurements were off a little bit, but I just pulled it out and then trimmed off the excess. So you can see how much easier it was for me to cover up the bottom by covering a piece of cardboard. So I'm glad I did it that way. All right, so now to cover the outside. Again, this beautiful black and white floral vinyl is what I'm going to be using to cover this. It ends up being about 4 inches wide and about 45 inches long. I just wanted to make sure I did not cover up those screw holes on the back. Okay, so I end up having to poke a little bit of a hole there so I could access the little screw to add my chain. Now, this is where I discovered that some of the paint was coming up because I didn't sand properly. So I gave it a coat of some clear matte spray paint, and you can see it works really well. I even got it on the vinyl and it was fine. So while that was drying, I created a new chain. I didn't like the blue and I found that it was actually quite bulky. So I'm using this black plant hanger that I picked up from Dollar Tree. So I am just using some wire cutters to pull apart the chain links, and it ended up being just the right size. So I set that aside. My pieces are all dried. Allow it to cure well before you start to assemble everything back together. So here I'm just reapplying the hinges, and then I will be attaching the chain on the inside. So now I'm just going to start to attach it all together. Now, this top little piece here, I ended up having to squeeze it together because it kept on slipping off of my screw. So just continue to squeeze it and make it smaller until the screw doesn't come through. I also want to mention that I did add a little bit of varnish on the upper rim. I wanted to make sure that there was going to be no wear and tear from me opening and closing this. So I am storing some sewing notions in here. I've got like some elastic and some Velcro. I have some snaps and some tools as well. And I'm just storing them in here. I just think it looks so beautiful in the craft room. I originally had a Rubbermaid tote and I wasn't that crazy about it. This is so much better. I am loving how it looks. So as always, I would love to know what you think of these craft room thrift store storage ideas by leaving me a comment down below. And I also would love to know any of your ideas for some added craft room storage that you have found lately. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it. Here is the playlist for you to view of my craft room series, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.